The NBA offseason has changed the landscape of the league. Where do the Pacers sit in the East now? Who have they passed? Have they moved up? Can they get into the top six? Are they a play-in team? Matt Moore from the Action Network and the Locked On Network and I will break it all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, y'all. Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, taking stock of the Eastern Conference. Lots of teams have made their moves. We'll see if the offseason is truly done or not. But where do the Pacers sit now? They got better. A lot of other teams wanted to get better. In fact, only one team intentionally got worse. Where do the Pacers sit in the East now? What are the tiers of this conference? Can the Pacers get into the top six? Is it reasonable for them to be there? Are they more of a play-in team? Are they still outside? Looking in, where are they in the conference? Matt Moore from the Action Network and Locked On Nuggets / Locked On NBA and I break that all down today, where the Pacers could be from a win total perspective, looking at the betting markets, everything on where the Pacers stand in the East. Really good discussion, and we'll just get right to it. You've probably heard us together on Locked On NBA. You've probably heard him on Locked On Nuggets, or you read him on the Action Network. It's Matt Moore, and we're here to talk about the Eastern Conference, which looks a little bit different, a lot different, and where the Pacers stand in it. And Matt, my kind of takeaway from the offseason before Bradley Beal went to Phoenix was, does every team in the East want to be better than they were last year this year? I think that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the preseason, it's the off season, and so right now it's like time for optimism and to be like everything's gonna work out, it's all gonna be great. Look how much better they're definitely gonna be better than last year. And then you get to like January and you're like, oh, they're about the same or worse. But I do think that like the Pacers are an interesting one to kind of look at. If we look at the entire Eastern Conference, though, the Boston Celtics I think improved. I think the Bucks got a little worse. I think the Sixers obviously have a big hanging question there.
Huh?
I think the Cavs got better. I think the Knicks got slightly better. And on kind of down the line, there's a lot of room for there's what I've kind of thought of as runway, which is kind of like how I want to look at it from a betting perspective. If you're betting overs or futures, is you want to look at like who has runway, and you may not take off. You may not be able to get into the air, but who at least has room in front of them to be able to get good enough to beat their market expectations.
Yeah, a key thing about improvement is like if you're a 50-win team to get to 55 or 60, the 5 wins you're getting are against the other 50-win teams that you didn't get last year. Like you're already going to beat the teams worse than you. That's a lot harder than going from, whatever Detroit was last year to a 30-win team, because all they have to do is club up on the bad teams and they can do that. So it's a little different looking at improvement on every level. But until the Brad Beal thing, I was like, dang, the East is going to be nuts. And then what's funny is, before I said that, that's actually what happened in the West until the Dame thing, where every team actually was going for it until the Blazers are no longer jumping off ship. So this exercise is going to be about the Pacers and where they stand in the East, because it's an interesting conference where I feel like, on one hand, if you look at the Pacers summer, right, I don't know how you feel about Bruce Brown versus some other free agents, but they probably got, the second or third best free agent who actually switched teams, like just straight up signed with a different team. Fred VanVleet obviously being the best. Obi Toppin is better than some options they had at power forward last year. So they're better, right? They're just better in that way. But is that improvement enough for them to go from where they were last year, which was 35 wins, up into that play-in, playoff range? And that kind of requires a look at the East, requires a look at the teams around them. So, Matt, my first question to you would say, is it dumb to go, hey, the Pacers were 26 and 22 when both Turner and Halliburton played? That's a good starting point. Or do you look at their 35-win season last year and go, that's the starting point for them to look at their growth?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about these kind of like the differences there in those dynamics, it's important. You have to contextualize it. Like you have to really pay attention to the league to understand the flows of it. And for me, it's like there was the Pacers before Hallie got hurt. And then there was the Pacers after Hallie got hurt, even when Hallie played.
Yeah.
And so when you have that like combo, you wind up with the situation of looking at like you're going to have to make the call of which one do you believe, essentially. And this happens throughout the season. Like I'm a big fan of saying teams are going to be 3 different teams throughout the course of any NBA season. You can give me any team last year and I can tell you the 3 different teams that they were throughout the season. And the Pacers to me were, I think, one team before the injury, and they actually lasted a long time under that duration, that iteration of them. That was a long stretch of them being good. And then there was the stretch without Hallie where it was, oh God, our pets' heads have fallen off. Everything is disastrous. And then Hallie got back and it was like, look, we're already this far out. We can pivot towards whatever. And so like he plays a handful of games and then they proceed to tank. So for me, I do think that number is not indicative of how good they were last year as a starting point. And then you can look at the both offseason additions, internal development, continuity, and quite honestly, motivation to maybe compete a little bit more toward a playoff spot. And all of those things, I think, equal a pretty sound foundation for wanting to be pretty bullish on the Pacers next season.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to look back and be like, okay, December 1st last year, they were 4th in the East. Like they were good. And they held on to 5th for a decent amount. And then January, I think it was 8th, when Halliburton actually got hurt, they were 6th. They held on to 6th for like 4 days, and then they never were higher than 8th because they were like dancing with tiebreakers with the Heat and Knicks. But like they were in that mix when healthy last year. So I would understand that optimistic take, but I also understand a couple other things that are at play here, which is like they were really good in the clutch, and that's great. And they still have a lot of the players that made them good in the clutch, but clutch play has been terribly unpredictable for all of time. Look at the Phoenix Suns last year for your most obvious example of that. Even look at the Pacers, who 2 years ago were one of the worst clutch teams ever, and last year were amazing, right? Like that is certainly a factor in their play. I think they'll be a good clutch team because they still have Tyrese Halliburton, but you cannot expect the same level of success. Even the 2018-19 Pacers, didn't have the same Oladipo magic they had the year before. So that makes me think a little bit of flukiness on that start. Not flukiness, that's wrong, but like they're probably a little over their win expectation for that start, but they were definitely good, and they were definitely among the top 8 in the East. And so that's where you have to actually zoom in and look at the East, where I'm like, okay, they were among this group, but you ran through it at the beginning, like basically besides the Nets, like every team in the top 8 is better or thinks they're better, or at least is in a situation that I think is better. And so it's kind of hard for me to balance that and go, okay, yeah, I get how they would be in that mix again, but also all these teams are going to be trying to be in that mix again.
Yeah, and I mean, you are right that all these teams are going to be trying to be in that mix again. I think one thing to kind of keep in mind, though, is that there will be teams that by the time that we get past January 1st have pivoted and are no longer competing for that kind of a spot. The other thing I would say is there are some teams I think that are vulnerable to drop off. Like Chicago, I think, is teetering. And I think their win total is still a little soft because the market continues to think that they are actually bad when they're not. But really, honestly, I think a lot of this is these teams are all motivated, I think, to go for it. But I'm not necessarily sure that they're substantially better than last season. Like there aren't a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference that I look at and go like, oh, that team's going to be way better than last season. And part of this is because of the new CBA, right? Like the Cavs spent a bunch of money and upgraded in the specific spot that they needed, but they had their core 4 kind of figured out. And we'll see what they do with Jared Allen, but like they're better, but they're not substantially better. The Sixers, we have no idea. Like we just do not know what's going to happen with that team. So there's a high level of variance in that result. The Knicks, like they're definitely kind of trying and build off of last year's success, but the real sad addition is like Dante DiVincenzo and losing Obi Toppin. And there's a lot to kind of dive in with the Knicks and try and figure them out. The Hawks, I expect to be better. They're one team that I'm just like, they're going to be better because I think a full season of Quinn Snyder, a full off season of Quinn Snyder. They lost John Collins. I'm very interested to see if they can pull off the Pascal Siakam trade. They are like, I think the if I had to rank them, the number 1 suitor for Siakam in terms of their interest and willingness to include assets. So if the Raptors ever give up the ghost and finally do the deal, there's a real capacity, I think, for Atlanta to way outperform expectations.
I also want Pacers listeners to really take in what you just said about Siakam. Continue.
Yeah, he's extremely good.
Yes, he is.
And so that like there's a high end result there. What I do think though is kind of interesting is when we talk about the play-in tournament, if we get past top 7, I do think there is like a hollow here, like a little bit of a dip, like a cave that contains all these play-in teams that I think are extremely flawed, very volatile, have uncertain both futures, not only for their roster, but for coaching and front office. And that creates more pressure. And that the Pacers are a team I think that can take a specific advantage of that gully to be able to spring out of it and be like, hey, there's the top 7, and then there's the Pacers, and then there's everybody else. Like, I think that that's an actually pretty realistic possibility depending on what happens.
Hey guys, quick little break here so I can talk to you about PrizePicks. It's daily fantasy made easy tonight. Taking Mike Trout, more or less than one hit. What do you think he's going to do? That's what PrizePicks is. You pick 2 to 6 players. Will they score more or less than their PrizePicks project? You can up to 25 times your money. It's not you versus other people. It's you versus PrizePicks projections. That's what I love about it. You can't get out research. It's you versus PrizePicks. And they have NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, any sport you watch. They offer it. You can make your picks in 60 seconds or less. It's super easy. It's safe. They have fast withdrawals, and it's operational in over 30 states as well as Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks Daily Fantasy, made easy. Yeah, I think Brooklyn could maybe like float above that group a little bit. They're going to be much worse, but we'll see, and we'll get to win totals in a second. The flip side of what you just said that's interesting too to me, though, is, yeah, Washington. Throw Washington out, right? Toss them to the side. Who else in the East is going to be worse? Like, maybe Milwaukee's like 2 wins worse, I guess. Like, who, it's like hard to pinpoint a team that I'm like, oh, are the Sixers actually going to be that much worse? Like, it's hard for me to point at a team and go, yeah, they're way worse. I mean, the Nets will win less games, but like the team they had from the trade deadline to the end of the season, they're probably better than that version of the Nets. It's like, it's hard for me to point at a team and go, you are obviously worse than the most recent version of you that I saw.
I think the one team there's only one team I can kind of identify, and that's the Raptors. That's the only team you can kind of identify and go like,
ignore me, I'm an idiot. Yes, the Raptors are worse.
And just go like, they lost Fred VanVleet, they replaced it with Dennis Schroeder, and so like they're a team. But this is also really relevant, right?
Yeah, they're worse.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think you're an idiot, just because like the Raptors have been such a proven commodity in terms of being competitive for so long, and they're also like, they're unstable. Everyone's kind of assuming that they're going to do a deal to liquidate. And I'm like, look, and I said this the other day on Twitter, I was just like, be really cautious if you're involving the Raptors in any sort of trade conversation. Like, I'm talking to fans, and so it's not going to, it's going to get to the GMs. But in my opinion, there is just as much weighing what other teams want for assets that the Raptors can trade for as it is the Raptors being willing to facilitate a 3-team deal or be involved in other deals or sell off their assets. So like the Raptors could make a move out of nowhere and try and improve. We all thought that they were going to liquidate at the trade deadline last year, and instead all they did was add Jakob Poeltl and double down. And they just continue to kind of like return to like, well, being not terrible is better than terrible. And so they've kind of like gone that direction, but I do think they're definably worse. I think part of this is just the way that I look at it because of the betting perspective is it's less about the middle of the bell curve of outcomes. And it's more about, okay, what do the tails look like? How likely are the tails? Like, how fat are those tails on these teams, both good and bad? And so I think you have teams like the Knicks where, okay, the Knicks were really good last year. And if the Knicks had a different coach, I would probably be betting them to win the title just because their odds are preposterous relative to their profile. And like, they're not going to win the title. You do that to get to an Eastern Conference final and then bet against them. But, there's also this thing of Julius Randle, like every other year, goes from, hey, pretty good to, oh God, terrible. Everyone hates him. The fans are booing him. Jalen Brunson had a fantastic season, was proved it the year before with the Mavs. So there's no real reason to think that Jalen gets worse. There's probably also like a little bit of a chance that he gets, better, but there's also like a little bit of a chance that maybe just like stabilizes a little bit. They lost Obi Toppin to the Pacers, and Obi was a huge part of their success because if you dive into kind of like what the Knicks profile looks like, it's the bench. The starters were like okay to not good. And then the bench was amazeballs. And so if you kind of flip that and you go like, well, Toppin's no longer going to be there, how much better can the starters be? What if they're not better? So there are these outcomes where I think that the top of the East, or the middle chunk of that top of the East, gets a little bit worse. Even the Cavs, as much as I'm bullish on them, I think you have to look, the Donovan Mitchell thing is a thing. Like he's going to be a free agent, and there's still a lot of like, who he's going to want to go to New York, blah, 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 blah. The Jared Allen trade. What if they botched a Jared Allen trade? What if I don't think they should trade him, but what if they do? What if they trade Jared Allen and they're worse? That directly impacts Indiana based off of that's a division opponent, right? And so I'll say this too. I think the Bucks are going to be, not considerably, but they're going to be intense. They're going to be more vulnerable this season than they were last year. And so again, that's a division opponent. And even if it's like, but the Pacers aren't going to beat the Bucks. Okay, you play them 4 times. What if the past result was like you lost all 4 and now you tack on one more win? That gets you 1 win closer to the playoffs. What if it's 1.5? These little margins add up a lot when you're a team like the Pacers that exists in the middle ground with a higher floor because of their youth and stability, I think.
Shout out to the Bucks for July 5th, just sneaking in that their superstar had a pretty important surgery. Just sneak that and just get that out there. No one's talking about it. That's an important downside risk thing for them. So that all makes sense and is important to me in this discussion, because when I wanted to try to figure out where I thought the Pacers could go upward in the East, because they want to, right? Chad Buchanan said it on TV. They think they can get into the 40s in wins. I think they can get into the 40s in wins. Tyrese Halliburton has tweeted they wanted to make the playoffs. He said it at his exit interview. They want to make the playoffs. Kevin Pritchard talked about them wanting to make the playoffs. TJ McConnell's talked about it. I don't need to give you more evidence. Like, it's very obvious by the Pacers' actions that they would like to be back in the postseason. So how do they do that? Well, let's look at the East. And I kind of have heard this floated out there, and I will agree with it. Like, do you think it's the top 5 teams from the East from last year? How likely do you think is it that is not the top 5 this year? Like, maybe the Hawks, if Dame's on the Heat, maybe they can get in there, but like top 4 seems pretty set, and like there's not a lot of room for a team like the Pacers to me to jump that high this year, right? So I kind of just skipped over those 5 teams from last year. Do you think that's a stupid way to do that, or do you think that's fair?
I think, I mean, I've got the Heat up there, and then the Knicks a little bit down.
They
lower.
can do it.
They're going to get Dame. Like, at this point, it's like too big to fail. Like the catastrophe it would be for Miami after losing Gabe Vincent and Max Strus to not get Dame Lillard. It would be an outright catastrophe. Like, it would be, and that's not something that ever happens with the Heat. So it's just like, it's incomprehensible to me. So I've got it right now. Celtics, Cavs. I actually have the Cavs second. Heat, then the Bucks, then the Sixers, just because
just shrug.
I can't. Yeah, and well, I will also say this: like, the odds are that they probably get returned for him. I even have them like downgraded significantly from last year's number. I have them down, like, the way I do this is there's a power rating, which is essentially what's the team favored on neutral court versus an average team, and then you can extrapolate that number out to a win total. So I have the Sixers still. I downgraded them 1.5, which is a major drop for Harden. If they get a good return on Harden, like the Clippers give up Terrence Mann, right? You tack on like a half point. Maybe if they get a third team involved and they get a good return, it goes up a point, whatever. They were still so good last year that I think their floor is pretty high. Like, this team still has Joel Embiid. They've still got good defense. They still got Tyrese Maxey. They still have shooters. So they'll still be pretty good. And then I have like the Knicks after that. So really, to me, like, I think the top 6 actually is pretty not solid, because again, I think that there's both injuries and just like, oh no, everything went bad. That could drop one of these teams out. I think that there's a good way to put it, because you kind of talked about how the East got better or didn't get worse. I think a good way to put it is all of these teams, I think, have weak floors in that if things go badly, they could really drop down. Like, if the Porzingis trade completely backfires and losing Marcus Smart is a bigger deal and Jaylen Brown's extension gets nasty, like, there is a world where I would not be like absolutely stunned if the Celtics were not nearly as good as we're expecting them to be. I have them as the best team in the East in the league by far. I went on Daniel LaRue's Real GM podcast and said that the top tier in the NBA is Boston, and that's it. Like, that is the top tier in the NBA based off of where I've got them. That said, they all have weak floors where I think that they can drop. However, reasonable results, you're absolutely right. That's like, we could take the top 6 and basically be like, Boston, Miami, Cleveland, Sixers, Knicks, Bucks. But those 6 are just like, they're going to be there. I can't see.
Yep.
I'm not willing to predict that any of those teams is going to be lower than 6th, though it's obviously possible with the weak floor, like I mentioned.
I agree with that. And I was going to say, if you include that top 5 plus the Damian Lillard added Eastern Conference champion Miami Heat, that's 6 playoff teams that I get why the Pacers could end up being like a pretty good amount better than last year, but not that much better where they're like contending for that spot. So I can't see them jumping into the top 6. Is there an argument to be like the 6th seed last year was the Nets at 45 wins? If the Heat get Dame, they won 44. Yeah, they're going to win more than 45 games. Like, are the Pacers going to improve by 10 wins from their offseason plus internal growth? And they'll probably get improved more from the latter than the former. Maybe. I mean, Halliburton's only 24. Mathurin should be better. Like, maybe. That's a lot of wins. That is a lot of wins to jump from their summer. I think they can get into the, lower to mid 40s. I think they probably should. What is their over under? Do you have it in front of you? Can I guess before you tell me? Is it 40 and a half?
It is not. It is lower.
Wow. Okay. Is it 37 and a half?
It is 37 and a half wins. Okay. That is the number.
Should have gone with my gut. So I can see the way that they get to low to mid 40s, but I can't see them getting to the high 40s, which is what I would be required to get among that group. But I can see how they get among the Atlanta, Chicago, Toronto area from last year, where I don't even know if Toronto's in that group. I'm guessing Toronto's over under something like 35 and a half. So when I look at the Pacers spot in the East, I still kind of feel like reasonable expectations, they're kind of in that play-in tier. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity for them, but it's going to require basically bad fortune for somebody, right? If there is an unexpected collapse, because last year we talk about like the Knicks or the Nets at 45 getting into their spot, right, into where they landed at that 6th spot. That was because Miami drastically underperformed, like massively like the Miami Heat were a bad regular season team. Like they were a bad regular season team, which makes their playoff run all the much more unpredictable, like incredible and unexpected and all these types of things. But they were genuinely bad. Unless one of those top 6 have a Heat year like last year, then there's not that opportunity for a 45 win team to get into the range. There's just not an opportunity there. I will just go ahead and break come out with this. I have the Pacers at 43.7 wins. I have
it. That's right. It's closer to where I would have them. I'm smashing the over you just gave me.
Yeah. They were one of our best bets that we gave out immediately. Like we hit that. I think it was actually 36 and a half when the market opened. It's up to 37 and a half.
I would go over on 40 and a half.
Yeah, me too. Yes. Like I'll take an alternate. Because for me, it's like, unless Tyrese Halliburton, who is young and has been relatively healthy throughout his career, like last year was a blip, then they're going to be, that to me is a 41 win team floor. It's just, that's to me is like, they're a 500 team. And when you have a baseline of 500, it's like, are you more likely to come in under or over? The things that drag you down are things like age and injuries, bad chemistry, which they don't seem to have, bad coaching, which they do not have. And in reality, I think there's a high, ceiling here. Like I would not be shocked at 46, 47. I'd be like, that's really impressive. Did not see that coming. Anything above that, and I'm just like, okay, they're probably way overperforming. One of the things that's interesting when you look at them, last season, they had so Pythagorean win expectation is basically, what was your point differential? How many should that be? Like based off of off of your point differential, which we know is a better indicator of team strength, what should you have been at? And that differential says actually that they overperformed last season
because of their clutch play. I was on this.
Correct. Because of their clutch play. But here's what's interesting about that, Tony. In the last 10 years, teams with a positive win differential, and what that means is teams that overperformed, that were better than their point differential, have gone over their win total at a 60% clip.
Wow. That is
So
interesting.
it's counterintuitive because what we think is like, oh, you should have
Like
been
the following
better.
season, you mean?
Do what?
Like the following season after
Yeah.
having I wonder if that's because they think they're better than they are and they make moves as a result of that, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense.
Yeah. I think that really is part of it. I think it's
Yeah.
like, well, we won this many games, like we're right there, just a few more moves.
Right.
I think also part of it is based off of
That's interesting.
the Pacers are actually like a really good example of this, where their point differential looks way worse. Why? Because they were outright tanking, so they got killed, right? So,
Touché, yes.
when you're losing by 30 in these games and you're not competitive at all, that makes you seem worse than you actually were. Like you're losing fewer games, but by way more is kind of what happens there. And so like there are kind of all these trends that also suggest that Indiana is actually, even though like the numbers you would dive into and be like, oh, they're, the numbers say that they're actually not that good of a team. It's like, yeah, but historically teams in their spot have tended to be better than the market expectation more often than not.
That's really interesting. And I buy that for them too, because they even the numbers showed they were pretty good and they made moves as such through their first 50 games. And then their last 32 were a total disaster. But we already talked about the context of why that is. So now we're in the tier of the East that we said, the play-in tier, where they have to pass teams to get there, right? They were 11th last year. They would have to actually get better than at least one other team to be in this tier. But I think it's very obvious to me to go, we already talked about this, Toronto's worse, right? And they were right with Toronto until the last 5 or so games when Toronto was like, crap, we really need to make the playoffs. And the Pacers were like, okay, whatever.
Yep.
And I think they can catch Brooklyn, who of their 45 wins, a significant number of them came when they had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on their team last year. And that is obviously no longer the case. They should be at least good. Like they're not an embarrassing team, but that they're a catchable team. The Bulls, I think, got better. The Bulls had no resources, but like they did okay this summer, but they also have like insane implosion potential where like if they start really they remind me a lot of the Pacers 2 years ago, who were just like praying that everything kind of clicked and it didn't, and then they blew it up. We'll see if they actually do or not, including signing Torrey Craig being one of their significant moves during the summer. So that's like Atlanta maybe, I guess, but you think they'll be better, but that's 3 teams I think the Pacers can catch to get into that 7, 8, 9 range. Wizards were right even with them last year too. They're obviously worse. So they should have enough cushion to me to clearly get into the plan. The question is, can they get a little higher than that? The Magic are going to be right on their butt all year because they were sneakily like pretty dang good from December 1st to the end of the year and also got better this summer. I don't think Charlotte and Detroit are worth talking about, even though they got better too. But that kind of grouping, I think they can and should catch Toronto. And then I think they can and should catch Brooklyn. Chicago's, and maybe that's how they get into that tier to me.
Yeah, so I think where I've got them projected is I've got them in the 8th spot tied with Chicago. But in that situation, like the tie goes to the team that isn't sad. And the Bulls are kind of sad. Like the Bulls want to trade Zach LaVine, can't find a deal that improves them enough to do it. They brought back Vucevic because it was better than not bringing back Vucevic. They re-signed Kobe White because re-signing him is better than losing him for nothing. Yeah. Ayo Dosunmu, same kind of deal. Yep. And like, I actually am higher on Kobe than I was to. I like Ayo Dosunmu, even though all of his advanced numbers are just basically like this player is trash, or at least like a negative impact player. I like his game a lot. So there are things there. I really like Billy Donovan. I've always been a Billy Donovan guy. I think he's underrated as a coach. Their defense, I think, is kind of proof of that last year. And I am kind of the opinion of just like when DeMar DeRozan has the usage that he does on this team, your ceiling is capped. He's going to be really good for your floor, but he can only be good for your floor. And he can only be good for your floor if he's in that role. He can't take a lesser role. He can't change his game. He just has to be DeMar and do his DeMar things. And then you're like, oh, you're a pretty good team with DeMar DeRozan. And you're never a great team with DeMar DeRozan. And that's just kind of like the reality of who he is. And so if I've got that, or I have the Pacers where it's like, well, what does a really great outcome for the Pacers look like? They're the fastest team in the league. They're one of the most efficient offenses in the league. They crack into the top 5. They look a lot like the Kings last year, quite honestly, in a very ironic twist. They're fast and they're extremely good on offense. The defense is not good, but it's better than kind of advertised. And if you dug into the numbers on the Kings, that actually was the case. Like the Kings were the second best road defense in the NBA last season. And that was like a number that blew my mind, and was a big reason why I backed them versus the Warriors in number of games in that series. And so like there's all these kind of indicators that show you what they can do. I love the fit of Obi Toppin. Like that's just a phenomenal fit. Like they're going to be so much fun in transition. They're just going to be absolutely ridiculous. Mathurin with another year of development. You've got so many pieces there kind of together. Miles Turner out of the trade talks. Miles' injury is always, I think, going to be a little bit of a you're going to be worried about Miles' injury most importantly. But I think they have enough options there and enough ways. Like they have more than one way to proverbially skin the cat. Like there's a lot of ways that they can get into a range where it's like, oh, they're really a lot better than we thought they were, even if it's just for stretches. Like they might be a team that they have a really good December and a really bad January, but they rebound in February. And then March is a little bit rough, but they make it home. There's all these kind of paths for them versus there are some teams I think that are very much like, if this does not go to plan, then things get really dicey in a hurry. And that includes a lot of the teams at the top, quite honestly. Like the Bucks have a very like narrow path because of how much depth they've lost and how much the young guys haven't really popped. So the Pacers to me have like a lot of paths here where it's like, they sneak into an 8 spot and they win a play-in spot because the rest of the East below them is just terrible. Like that to me is a real capacity where it's like the Raptors absolutely just like things imploded and they went the opposite direction. And the Pacers wound up facing Charlotte in the 8-9 matchup for the last playoff spot. There's all these kind of dynamics that I think can get them in there, whether it's sneaking into a 6 spot. Like if you ask me, even with the Hawks, like who is the most likely team to wind up outside of the play-in tournament of the teams in there? Like who would you want the bet? Not who has the most likely chance, but who would you want to bet for a top 6 spot? The Pacers would probably be my number because of their number would be long, but their upside is higher than a lot of these other teams. And I think their floor is significantly higher too.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see of these teams too that are right behind them. Like, can any young guy pop and just change this discussion completely with like Paolo, Cade, Halliburton? Will the Wizards have anything interesting happen? Like, can any of these teams make? There's always one team every year that's just like the surprise darling of the NBA, which was the Pacers 6 years ago. You know, could that happen in the East again? We'll see. But I think right now the lines of demarcation are sort of clear, and the Pacers have moved into the play-in tier. Can they get to the postseason? That depends on 2 50-50 games. How exciting the play-in tournament is one of the few things that everybody likes that I don't like very much in the NBA. We'll see if I know. Can you believe it? I mean, we could talk about it if you want for a second. I don't like it. I don't get it. Well, I think they had it right in the bubble when they had like you had to be within this much of the team to actually like be included in this. And they got rid of that. So now it's like some crappy 10 seeds. Like, well, they don't deserve to be in this. This is stupid.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think my response to those criticisms is maybe they don't deserve to be in them, but if they're a crappy 10 seed, shouldn't you beat them?
Yeah, that's happened every time. But like, who wanted to watch the Spurs in the play-in tournament 2 years ago? Why was that a game that had to happen? Can we just skip that?
Maybe not, but I think the possibility here is it puts more pressure on those teams to actually get it done. And what I think it also does is it removes the teams that are absolutely limping to the end. It puts those teams at more risk of getting eliminated, which honestly I think is good because there's so many times when I'm like, I would you rather have one game where a team doesn't want to be there or a 4-game series of a team that doesn't want to be there?
What I would say 2 years ago is thank God we played 82 games and determined that the Clippers were 6 games better than the Pelicans, just so the Pelicans could knock out the Clippers in one game. That makes a lot of sense to me, Matt Moore. That is a wonderful outcome. maybe,
but I'll also say that I think I have a hard time getting behind that because show me a team that takes the regular season seriously and still winds up in the play-in tournament. Like so many of these teams,
Miami,
like the Clippers. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And like, that's a good example, right? Like they couldn't even beat the Hawks, you know, right. they couldn't even, and they almost could beat the Bulls. Yeah. So like, but I do like the idea of putting the onus on them to be like, no, you weren't good enough to save yourself. You weren't good enough to get one of these 6 spots. So now you're going to have to prove it. Now you're going to actually have to show up and win a must-win game.
It's fun. And I guess it's fine. I just hate that we're like, okay, Well, the 8 seed was way better than this 9 seed, but who
You're
cares?
complaining on two ends, though. You're like, on the one end, you're saying, I don't like it because this team is way better and shouldn't have to prove themselves. And on the other end, you're saying, oh, but this other team that isn't as good got past them. So which is it? Were they much better or were they not?
That happens all the time. One game can happen all the time.
Yeah. But I also just like ultimately think that we have enough built-in ironclad stability sample size in the NBA.
And I think that's what the NBA is going for. They want to fight the notion that it's all stability, always the best team wins everything. But I want the playoffs to be the best teams versus the best teams as often as possible. That's what I like about basketball. I think that's a fair criticism of the play-in tournament.
The only other thing I would kind of push back on is it does give an opportunity for if you're a team behind, because we're going to see this eventually. Like most of the time, these 10 and 9 seeds are going to lose, but we are going to see, I think, some teams where it's like they got injured and desperately had to catch back up, and they made a really like valiant run and got back in, and I think it's cool that also, I will say it makes for great discussion points for us as podcasters and media people, where it's like, okay, what if the play-in tournament didn't exist and the Heat had been the 7 seed and had played the Celtics in the first round?
That's true.
What happens then? Like, do the Bucks, get to the Eastern Conference? Do they make the finals? Like all these things, like those scenarios, it does change the course of NBA history, which you can hate. But I also like that it creates this counterfactual for us to debate.
How do people feel about the Lakers if they lose to the Wolves and get swept by the Nuggets in the first round last year?
Right.
That is like a very possible thing that could have happened. And I keep crapping on the tournament, but like I was standing up, hands on my head for Heat Bulls on April 13th last year. So the game is cool.
This is the real key, is that more games with stakes is what the NBA needs.
Yeah, that's why I like the midseason tournament.
Yeah, we are brutally low on games with stakes. And I'll also say, honestly, you want to know what the best thing about the play-in tournament is? It's not the play-in tournament. It's what it's done with March.
Yes.
It's agreed. That most of March is terrible and it's a slog. If you're at the top or you're at the bottom, those teams do not care. It's why everyone's like, look at the Lakers' performance in March. And I'm just like, okay, you faced the teams that were either resting, injured, or tanking. Congratulations. But the teams that are, when you get those matchups where it's like play-in tournament team versus play-in tournament team battling for who's going to have home court or who's going to be in the 10 versus the 11, like we have stakes in March and we just need more stakes in an 82-game season. So that to me is worth it no matter what happens in the play-in tournament.
I do agree. I like games when both teams try. That is more fun. I just wish there was that game's back gap. But hey, I can't have my cake and eat it too. Thank you, Matt Moore, for the time. We will see where the Pacers end up. I will presume, have them about where you do at 8, but I have to do my normal thing where I look at the schedule and see if they have any ridiculously hard back-to-backs against an easy team or something like that change how I feel about their win total. And I can see every single game listed one at a time against who and when. We will see how that goes. Where can people find you and your work covering the Nuggets, the NBA, and more, Mr. Moore? Wow, that was not intentional, but that was a great pun.
And very original, Tony, as well.
I've never done it myself. I get my one.
You can find him at you can find me at HP Basketball on Twitter. You should check out the Action Network app if you have any sort of interest in betting or the markets or how that stuff is looked at. It's a totally different way to look at sports. Just download the Action Network app. Best way for you to track that stuff. I'm on Locked On NBA on Tuesdays with David Ramil, and when I'm fortunate, a couple days with Tony East throughout the season. And I'm the co-host of Locked On Nuggets here in Denver.
I don't know if you just intentionally misspoke or not. I think you said your name on Twitter. It's called X now, I believe. I don't know if that'll be a thing by the time this episode is out, but gonna have to get used to that one. I don't know if I'll ever say it out loud. I think I'll just continue.
Yeah, I'm just gonna call it Twitter no matter what it is. It's the same way that I still call it the D League instead of the G League. I'm just like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not calling this the Gatorade.
If I ever have to say where you can find me on threads on this show, I'm just done talking about social media on this show.
Out.
I think that's the end. Tomorrow, looking at one of the couple things I haven't talked about with free agency yet. The guy still out there for the Pacers on the two-way market. Plus, Tyrese Halliburton was on the Slam cover. How sick is that? We'll talk about all that tomorrow, and more fun stuff coming as we round out July. Locked On Nuggets will have fun stuff about the NBA champion Nuggets. We don't get to say that enough. We go straight from the finals to all this transaction stuff. People forget about the champs. Listen to the show about the champs. We'll be back tomorrow. Everyone have a great day. Talk to you soon.